I'm going to leave this here and probably stop a few times and drink a little bit of water and talk with you a little bit about the Food Safety Modernization Act. Let me see if I can figure out this remote. I presume it's the first button. But as James said, I actually didn't expect him to read my whole bio. It is kind of long and boring. Let me suffice it to say that we did grow up in a farming community in upstate New York. I didn't know what the word upstate meant until I went to college and I roomed with a gal from downstate. So then I learned that I was from upstate. I thought I always was from western New York, but that's all right. We had 40 acres of land around the house. It was usually in hay or something like that, and that land was rented back to the farm where my dad worked. We had a dairy farm up the road one direction. We had beans for processing across the road in one direction, and we had a swamp across the road in another direction, and that's where I learned to yes, James?
They're asking that you get a little closer to the
Sure, I can get as close as you might want. Yeah, and if I need to, I'll go ahead and grab this thing. But I did not take tap dance lessons. Apparently, I should have. I didn't take ice skating lessons either. And if you see the knock on my noggin many years ago, you know that. I have worked now for Food and Drug Administration for what started out as 3 months, and I'm in month number 27. And I'm at the Food and Drug Administration on loan from USDA. So we're supposed to really be just a 3-month deal, kind of get the ball rolling. And as we continue down the road of looking at what this produce safety regulation might be, we decided just to keep me there. And so far, I'm still there, at least through the fiscal year that we're in, so several more months from now. I applaud the fact that you guys are still here. And I recognize that I'm what's separating you from supper later on, so I'll try to move along in quick step fashion. So I'm going to start out talking about the Food Safety Modernization Act. Sometimes I'll say it's FSMA, FSMA. So that's what I mean, Food Safety Modernization Act. And I'm also going to spend a better part of my talk about the produce safety regulation. Let me see if I've got this right to advance a slide. And apparently I don't. How about, there we go. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. Talk about the legislation, talk about the themes, and the major theme, I'll say this more than once, is prevention. It's not waiting for something to happen and then trying to fix it later. It's preventing it from happening now. So the major themes of this legislation is prevention. I'm going to talk about the rule that we're working on. It is a draft, it is a proposal. I'll chat a little bit about your opportunity to comment on that. And then I'm going to touch upon these other areas: research, education, and outreach. We think that is just so critical. Implementation and compliance and what that could mean, that can kind of be scary. We want to make it less scary than you might think. And then talk about some regulatory timeframes. Let me make one comment, and this is based on the discussion over the last hour with Beth and some of the questions that y'all were asking. So we've got the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is a law. We've got this produce safety regulation, which will be the requirements that we feel are appropriate. And then the next, it might not be the next step, but certainly a piece later on is you've got an audit, or the audit checklist that Beth was talking about, whether it's the harmonized GAP checklist or whatever. We look at that as one tool that you can use to demonstrate compliance with the regulation, and then therefore you're complying with that regulation. So I'm not going to talk to you about an audit. I'm going to talk to you about what the requirements of that regulation are going to be to the extent that I can. And as Beth pointed out, I am somewhat in a box. I can't tell you a lot because of where we are in the process, but I'll tell you as much as I can tell you, and then we can go from there. So kind of the thing I really want to talk about here is this produce safety rule. And we look at this as a whole big puzzle. What we've got is the rule itself, and I'll chat about that. But then we feel like research, there's still research out there we need to have done. And there's a couple areas that are particular to that research, and I want to chat with you about that. We feel like education and outreach, and I look at this activity, being here today, as one part of this education and outreach initiative that we're taking. It is so critical as time goes on, and this isn't something, this education piece isn't something that's going to come to an end. It's going to perpetually go on. It's going to get refined. We may shift directions, but we always want to have this education and outreach component well long after this regulation goes final, in effect. And then you've got the implementation part, the implementation and compliance part. And that's once the regulation is final, it's cast in stone, written as a final regulation, this is what you got to meet. There's going to be an implementation and compliance strategy, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to hit these points as time goes on. Just so I don't forget it, I threw this sort of additional resources slide up ahead of time. I will leave these links with James or shoot them over to Lee. Natalie Guidry's in the back of the room. Natalie, you want to wave your hand or stand up or something or other? She's your local FDA public affairs contact, and she can get you just about anything you might need. So I can leave all this information, all these links with her. So there's a FSMA page, homepage you can go to, and it's got updates on there pretty regular. There's a Produce Safety Alliance website. I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about that. Faith hit about that a little bit earlier. And then there's just general, everyday Food and Drug Administration produce safety stuff that's out there. And so we've got you that link as well. But I will leave all that information with Lee and James and Natalie, so you guys will have a good resource you can go to. So let me talk a little bit about what this thing is. And the Food Safety Modernization Act was signed into law January 4th last year, 2011. So we're past a year with this law out there. It directs us as FDA staff members to do certain things, to write certain things. And so we are working on that. In FSMA, if you read the whole darn thing, there are over 50 different things that FDA is supposed to be doing. One of them is what I'm focusing on, which is the produce safety regulation. There's other regulations that need to be written. There's guidance documents that need to be written, and we're going to write some for produce as well. We're going to update some things that are currently out there. We've got to report back to Congress on this. We've got to conduct studies on that. So there's 50 different things that you got to do as part of FSMA. Fortunately, I am generally involved only in the produce safety regulation side of things. I'd be pulling my hair out if I had to do too much more than that. So then we're going to talk about what the produce safety regulation actually is, what's in it. Let me just state that today, whatever today is, January 26th, we still consider it deliberative. It's not written in, it's not published yet as a proposal, so it could change tomorrow. Or maybe it's changing today with me being here and them being back in College Park, Maryland. Maybe it's changing. What I'm going to tell you is what I know to be true for right now. I really don't expect that many more changes before it's actually published, but you just never know. There could be a world of changes out there. I don't expect it, but you just never know. So I just want to preface that what I'm going to tell you today could change, but you're going to have a great opportunity to provide some comment on that. And then I'm going to talk about the next step. So I'll give you a little bit of the regulatory thing here in a minute. But just so you get a little bit of flavor for those of us that were working on writing this darn thing, we had technical experts. We've got scientists. We've got lawyers, because there's always a lawyer that has to participate in this thing. We've had environmental assessors who are giving us the take on how what we're thinking of would affect the environment. Those folks have been working on this rule with us. Economists, what's it going to cost? What's the savings going to be? What's the health burden, public health burden going to be? That kind of thing. So we've had those folks involved. Field staff have been involved. I can't put my finger on whether anybody from the district office here, the New Orleans or Nashville district office were involved, but I know some folks from different parts of the country at FDA were involved in this thing. The compliance folks who want to know how we can make this thing, how they can go out and if they do an inspection, how do they know you as the farmers are compliant with this thing? But more than that, we've also engaged other folks from other government agencies that know how their work is going to impact on food safety. Specifically, my home is back at U.S. Department of Agriculture. That's where I came from, got 27 years working with them. So we brought in folks and we talked about the National Organic Program. We had somebody come in and talk to us about that. We had somebody come in and talk to us, when I say us, I mean Food and Drug Administration, come in from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We wanted to hear what those folks had to say and how we wanted to make sure what we were suggesting in this written document wasn't going to conflict with good practices for stewardship of the land. We've interfaced with folks from the Environmental Protection Agency, specifically regarding water and biosolids and things of that nature. Fish and Wildlife Service. So we've really tried to engage as many different folks as we could to ensure that we've covered as many different bases and we didn't leave something hanging out there that when you're reading this thing, you're going to say, what were you thinking? You knucklehead kind of thing. So let me talk about the law. This is the FSMA law. There's 4 sort of major themes that all wrap together. Prevention, and as I mentioned, the whole key to this thing is prevention, not wait for something to happen and fix it, but to keep it from happening to begin with. Enhancing partnerships, inspections, compliance, and the response. What happens when you do go out there to do an inspection and you find something that needs to be corrected? How do you respond to that? And then import safety. And so to the question that came up, about an hour and 20 minutes ago, about whether imported product and those farmers in wherever, pick a country, Mexico, Peru, Chile, New Zealand, China, whatever the case is, that they need to be complying with the produce safety regulation, the same as you farmers here in Tennessee or Virginia or North Carolina or Washington State. So they've got to comply with the same requirements that you've got to comply with. We want to make sure the regulations are effective, that the guidance that we create is useful and helps explain what we're asking for so that you know how to handle it in your operation. We want to make sure that the partnerships we create with either foreign governments or the state Department of Agriculture here in Tennessee, that those are robust and useful and really doing what we need them to do, because we need that whole network of folks working on this thing with us, and that any compliance activity that is taken is effective. I don't want to beat you up anymore about prevention, but I will say that FDA has got some experience working with prevention-based regulations. The juice HACCP, seafood HACCP, those are prevention-based kind of things, if you're dabbling in any of those kind of industries. Produce safety, in terms of a regulation, is new. We recognize it's new. We recognize that there's going to be a learning curve, not to what you're doing on your farming operations. I'm not here to tell you how to be a different farmer or a better farmer, believe you me. What I want to help you do is understand how to comply with the regulation that we're putting forward. There's a little bit of a twist, and I'm going to talk about it in a few slides. Is this there we go. There's a little bit of a twist when it comes to farming operations about whether or not you need to comply with the produce safety regulation or a different regulation called the Preventive Controls Regulation, and that's Food Preventive Controls Regulation. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a few slides. There is a little bit of a it's not a gray area, but it's an area that is going to require a little bit more explanation. So I'll get there, and it really has to do with whether or not you as an operation have had to register already with Food and Drug Administration with your facility. So there's a couple other things going on too. One of them is an intentional adulteration standards. That's part of this whole package. It's not part of produce safety reg, so I'm not going to dwell on it. It's just something that is coming along, and that crosses all foods, not just produce. A couple things to know is in the FSMA law, it tells us not only do we have to write a regulation, which I'll talk about in a second, but we also have to have 3 public meetings during the comment period of this regulation. That's just for the reg. It also tells us we've got to write guidance documents, which is not a regulation, it's guidance, and that we've got to have 3 public meetings to help explain those guidance documents. So all total, we're going to go out and see you guys an awful lot across this country. So we're kind of excited about being able to do that and moving forward. So the directive of FSMA basically says FDA, Food and Drug Administration, in coordination with USDA and our states, you've got to establish science-based minimum standards, blah, blah, blah. You all can read what that says up there. Let me tell you, cut to the chase. It tells us that the produce safety regulation has to apply to raw agricultural commodities, RAC, R-A-C. That are fruits and vegetables. There's raw agricultural commodities that are not fruits and vegetables, like grain, for example. This applies to fruits and vegetables. That's where we're going with this thing. The standards need to minimize risk. That's another point that we need to focus on. They should be science-based. And let me tell you, there's a lot of science. I mean, you can go to University of Tennessee, you can go to any land-grant university across the country, you can go to private organizations that have done research. There's a lot of science that identifies different routes of contamination for things that we are concerned about. specifically regarding human pathogens and contamination of human pathogens and then the routes of those contamination. What we really are focused on is those human pathogens that result in serious health consequences or death. We're not so concerned about a pathogen that the worst it does is give you a tummy ache. We're not concerned about that with this produce rule. We're concerned about the pathogen like E. coli 015787 or salmonella that not only can make me maybe a little sick. I ate a lot of dirt when I was a kid, so I probably have a pretty good immune system. But folks that have a weakened immune system, or children, or the elderly that don't have quite the strength, that these human pathogens could kill them and have killed them. That's what we're focused on here, not just the thing that's going to make the average person just feel a little, down in the dumps for a couple of days. Now, the law is also specific, and it tells us what areas we've got to focus on. So these are the 6 areas that it basically tells us we've got to focus on: soil amendments, hygiene, packaging, water, temperature controls, animals in the growing area, and water. It tells us we've got to focus on those. We've got to do something about those. And so we have. The ones that are in bold, the soil amendments, hygiene, animals, and water, those are the four biggies. You talk to just about any cooperative extension or research scientist or anyone anywhere that does anything with produce, and these are the 4 biggies that folks generally focus on. The law tells us we've got to have sufficient flexibility to be applicable to various types of operations. Big operations, small operations, those that grow and those that handle. So essentially we're taking you from growing your farm, your fields, your harvesting, and your packing. So we're kind of getting that whole range covered in this regulation. And it's got to be flexible enough that it can apply to small businesses, conventional production, organic production, we don't care. It's got to be flexible enough to apply to all of that. And to the scale and diversity of operations. So whether you're a single commodity, maybe you only grow tomatoes, or maybe you grow 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 different crops. It's got to be able to be applied to that whole range of things. The law also told us to look at other things besides sort of this grouping of 6 up here. And so we have looked at other things. I'll give you a rundown of those as I get into the details of it. So that's what the law tells us to do. Next thing is, there is a regulatory process that we've got to follow. And Beth said this earlier, and I applaud you for saying this is a proposal. Big, bold, red letters, it's a proposal. This is not the final word. So I don't want you to go back home when you read this darn thing in the Federal Register and panic that, oh gosh, I've got to comply by this tomorrow. That's not the case. It's a proposal. We want your comments. So what we've done so far is we've drafted the regulatory language and the explanatory language. It's not simple enough to write a regulation. We've got to tell you what our thinking was about writing this regulation. That includes both the economic analysis and an environmental assessment. So that all comes into this package when it's issued as a proposed regulation. Next, it goes through internal FDA legal review. After that stage, it goes basically to the White House, to their Office of Management and Budget, OMB. So it's going here next. And that's the point of this process where all the other government agencies that may have something to do with this regulation or have interest in this regulation, that's their time to read it, review it, and ask us a million questions. We go back and forth with OMB until everybody feels like, okay, what you've got written is plausible, makes sense, let's get it through final clearance, and then let's publish it in the Federal Register. Now, Beth said this earlier, and other folks as well, you're not going to want to sit down and read a long document. You may, and I applaud you if you do that, that's fantastic, and I suggest you probably should do that, just so you know what's in there. But you also want to count on your cooperative extension agents, your university folks, your trade association folks to do a real thorough reviewing of it. You come to them with questions. You can comment yourself. They can comment on your behalf, whatever the case may be. We want all that to happen. But it's a proposal. Just remember when it comes out that it is a proposal. Now, where is it right now? in this stage, right now, it's at this point right here. We're going back and forth with Office of Management and Budget. I would expect that we're going to have this thing out pretty soon as a proposal, so you should see it actually hitting the Federal Register in print. But right now, it's still with the Office of Management and Budget. So let's look at a timetable so you can see what'll happen next. So the proposal is going to be issued. Let's say, just for example, it's not going to happen, but let's say, for example, the thing publishes today. All right, just, you know, in an odd scenario. I'm expecting that we will have probably a minimum of 75 days. You will have probably a minimum of 75 days to comment on this thing and submit your written comments. They've got to be in writing. As much as I'd love for you to call me up and talk to me on the phone, I'm not taking notes. What you say, you need to put in print and forward it into the Federal Register docket. I can't do that for you. So you're going to write your comments, and I would love for you to say, hey, you know, you guys hit the ball out of the park. Home run, this is fantastic. Now, I don't expect you're going to say that, but if you do, that's all right. But also, you could say, you know what, this is terrible. I don't even know what to say. Now, as much as those are comments, they're not really very useful. You like this part because of this reason. You're having challenges with this other part for this reason. We've got data from the University of Tennessee that demonstrates in our growing area, we should be able to do this instead of what you're proposing. We need details. We need specificity. If you send me a comment or send a comment in that says, I hate it, period, ship it off. Okay, you commented, but it really isn't all that useful. So try to give us some detail, try to give us some specificity. Now, during this 75 days, we are mandated, as I said earlier, to have some public meetings. So we're going to have 3 public meetings at least across the country. And the point of the public meetings is to address what questions you might have to help clarify something. So if you don't understand something, this is your opportunity to get to one of these meetings. At least one of them, we're going to webcast. So if you have access to a computer, then you can also join that meeting regardless of where you might be in the country. And you can hear from us and you can submit questions to it. And then once the public meetings are done and once this comment period is finished, by law, we've got a year to write that final regulation. Now, the senior leadership at the agency could tighten that up, and they may, I don't know. But right now, the law says we've got to have it issued within a year. So let me just give you a little quick sort of calendar lesson. If this thing published today, day number 75 is April 10th. So you got between now and April 10th to get your comments in. It's not going to publish today, so let's say it publishes tomorrow. You got till April 11th or April 12th or whatever the case happens to be. But get your comments in. It will tell you in the document how many days that comment period is. If it's 75, if it's 120, if it's 150, whatever. It'll tell you what it is, and it'll tell you when you've got to get your comments back into us. The public meetings down here that we're going to have, the 3 public meetings, will also be announced in the Federal Register, so there'll be an official notice of that. But I would expect we're going to publicize as much as we possibly can on the website, get it out in briefing materials and things of that nature. So we don't want anybody to not know what's going on. We're just really trying to blanket the country with this kind of information. So this is sort of the end of the FSMA part or the law part. Now I want to jump into the regulation itself and talk a little bit about that. I want you to read this. It was a quote by President Dwight Eisenhower, and I came across this in my journeys quite a while ago, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And what I want you to know when we're talking about something like this is that 2 things are going on here. First, the Food and Drug Administration has a mission or a mandate. They are mandated by law to protect public health. It's not just a good idea. Legally, that's what they've got to do. So when I put on my FDA hat, that's my responsibility. But the other part of that is we want to do it in such a way that makes sense, that is practical and is reasonable regarding this produce safety regulation. So to get us from a bunch of pointy-headed bureaucrats to a document that you can read and understand and have some good comments about, we've gone out and we've tried to blanket the country to the extent that we can. We did farm tours, we did listening sessions. The Pew Charitable Trust hosted some produce safety project workshops. They wrote different reports and interacted with farmers all across this country. I'm going to miss a couple of the states, and I apologize for that, but we went to Arizona, California, Texas, New York, Florida, Georgia, Ohio, Delaware, a couple others. Make up 4 other states for me. That's where we went when we did this thing. And we went out and we wanted to hear, we wanted to listen. We wanted to hear what you had to say. And the point of the listening sessions was to zero in on those 4 topics that we feel are most critical: water, personal hygiene, workers, animals, and soil amendments. And so that was the focus of some of that work. Other focus was just getting out there and seeing what's happening on the farm. We visited farms that were large and farms that were small. We visited farms that were heavily mechanized in their operations, and we visited Amish and Mennonite farms that, because of their religious tenets, can't use mechanization or electricity or tractors even to some extent. They use work animals to draw their plows and so on. We visited farms that are single crop. We visited farms that were multi-crop. We visited organic farms and sustainable, although I would suggest that most farms are sustainable or you wouldn't be in business. We visited conventional production farms. And we visited farms that have not only a fruit and vegetable component, orchard, row crops, whatever, but also had livestock farm as part of their operation. So you could see the interaction of the 2 of those kind of things. So we visited all that to see what's out there, to talk with folks, to see how what we were thinking, bounce it off, see how it would work. Something else that we did is we established the Produce Safety Alliance. And again, Faith talked about that a little bit earlier. And I'm going to get into a lot of detail out in a minute. But the whole point of that is to provide fundamental on-farm food safety training and education. That's what we want to do there. I applaud you all for being here today, sitting through this session, sitting through the other sessions that you've been involved in. But for every one of you, I bet you know another farmer somewhere in your neighborhood that should be here with you and isn't. Now, maybe that's because they don't have the time. They're out, fixing harvesting equipment or checking on their water lines or whatever. Who knows what they're doing this time of year. Or it could be that they just don't care. And we want to reach out to everybody, though. We don't want to limit this. I applaud you for being here, but we want to reach out. And we're hopeful that the Produce Safety Alliance is going to be one of those tools that we can reach out and touch as many different farmers as we can. We've engaged the Natural Resources Conservation Service because we feel like those folks who probably interact with you a whole lot more than you see in a Food and Drug Administration person. I would guess you see NRCS and working with them on different projects and stuff like that. So we wanted to engage those folks as well. So through all this, through the farm tours and the listening sessions and so on, there were some common themes that we heard. So just in your mind, tick off which one of these, or many of these that make sense to you. This is what we heard. When we write this regulation, one size doesn't fit all. Make sure that the rule is scale appropriate and not too burdensome. Now that's burdensome as the eye of the beholder, but we got that message. We want it to be science-based and risk-based, flexible, practical, and common sense. Hold imports to the same standard. Education is hugely important, and leverage existing mechanisms for compliance. So that's where I'm going to talk towards the end of this about the whole concept of audits and what other tools are out there for helping to demonstrate compliance. So those are some of the themes we heard when we were out there talking to farmers, and we hope that we were able to incorporate those themes throughout the produce safety regulation once it actually hits the Federal Register. Some of you may be familiar with one or more of these documents. This first document is the 1998 GAPS Guide from Food and Drug Administration. I hope you're familiar with that one way or the other. The second document is a commodity-specific guidance document for leafy greens. So we just went from general, any commodity, to leafy greens, anywhere in the United States or even internationally for that matter, to what we've got here is the leafy greens marketing agreement that's California-based. There's also one that's Arizona-based, but this one happens to be California-based. So we went from general to commodity-specific to a state commodity marketing agreement. And so far, that's some of the progression that's out there. There's even more progression throughout the country. The tomato metrics in Florida, for example. The state of Ohio is considering a marketing agreement for their leafy greens growers. So we've got a lot of different options that are out there. So let me talk about the produce safety regulation in the context of some of the rest of FSMA. And I'm going to start at the bottom here. So we've got the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. And that is to assure compliance with, in our case, the produce safety regulation by foreign growers and shippers. That regulation, when it comes out, its primary function is going to be to ensure that foreign suppliers are meeting the same thing you're having to meet. The Sanitary Transportation Regulation, it's going to have to do with shipping, transportation, receiving of produce once it's off your farm. So you may not be touched by it too much, but there might be a little bit of overlap. So whenever that document hits the Federal Register for you to comment on, if you do something with transportation, once it leaves your farm, you might want to pay attention to that one as well. The next one here, this is the Foods Preventive Control Regulation. And how many of you do anything in terms of value added, or you already have to comply with good manufacturing practices in some way? You've got a cider where you're pasteurizing or something on those lines. Anything like that, you probably already know what the good manufacturing practices are and how that affects your business. The reason I mention it here in the context of the produce safety regulation is this is where, if your farm, let me back up and ask you a question. How many of you, let me see a show of hands, all you do is grow and pack your own stuff? Okay, hands down. How many of you grow and pack somebody else's stuff? You don't have a neighbor that they don't want to pack it, so they send it to you to pack? Anything like that? Nothing? Thank you. Thank you. If you grow, but more so pack, somebody else's crop, then you are going to be subject for the packing part to the Food Preventive Controls Rule. Now, by show of hands, only Beth's hand went up. So what that means is everybody in this room is you've got to worry about this regulation, the produce safety reg, and you do not have to worry about this other reg. But if you know folks that pack somebody else's product along with their own, then this other piece comes in. And the way you'll know it, if you have to register your facility, your packing house, because of the Bioterrorism Act of 2002, if you have a registration number, that's what you're going to have to comply with in terms of the packing operation. Beth, question?
There are some audits, regardless of the type of organization that you are, there are some audits that require you to have or to register with FDA. So it would be the government's requirements, not necessarily your food safety audit requirements for FDA registration.
Okay, thank you, Beth. Appreciate that. Excuse me.
There are some people probably that will be impacted by that. They're just not here in this room.
Okay.
We do have one person who is USDA certified that do some packing for other growers.
Okay. Well, knowing that is actually quite a common practice in other parts of the country, what we tried to do when we wrote the packing house part of the produce reg, and another group entirely wrote the packing part here, is we tried to make sure we did things the same. So that you grow and pack your own stuff, and your neighbor 2 miles down the road grows and packs somebody else's stuff, grows his own and packs somebody else's stuff. We wanted you guys to be held to the same basic set of standards on that packing part. We didn't want you to be having to do one thing and him having to do another thing. So we did a lot of talk amongst the two groups that were writing these, just so that there wasn't going to be a lot of difference from one to the other depending on where you fell. If you were affected only by the produce safety regulation, that's fantastic. If you're affected by this preventive controls reg, your farming is going to be under here and the packing is going to be under here. So we just wanted to make sure they were enough alike that it didn't cause that much more confusion out there.
If you were leasing trailers the gas tomatoes in from a third party, would that throw you into that second group?
You know, that's a good question. So you're leasing trailers to gas your tomatoes. Are they your tomatoes?
No.
I'm going to have to get a feed on that. I don't know, Natalie, you know the answer to that question? My gut tells me you probably don't, but I don't want to say that definitively yet.
Does that at least make it yours?
Well, right, I understand that. It may be that it may be not that it's the lease. It may be the activity of gas in the tomato that throws it into the other category.
If it was your neighbor's trailer and he said, yeah, you can use it, so you pay him $1 to lease it, and
Then it becomes yours for that period of time. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Natalie, can I draw upon you to get that question down, and we'll try to get an answer before the thing? Excellent, she's got it covered for us. So we'll try to get you an answer on that one here before the conference is over. All right, so let me jump into the actual regulation and talk a little bit. And again, I'm somewhat in a box. I said I didn't take tap lessons as a kid. If I took them, I probably wouldn't have remembered it anyway. But so let me talk about, when we talk about what the regulation affects, the phrasing we use is you're in scope but you're exempt for some reason, or you're out of scope. So those are the kind of things to keep in mind. Now, when you see the regulation come out in print, you'll see these words scattered throughout there. We're going to start with in scope because that's the easiest. If you're a fresh fruit or vegetable, you're in. Generally speaking, there's going to be some exceptions, and I'll talk about that. Mushrooms are essentially a fresh fruit and vegetable. Think about going to your produce section of Kroger or Winn-Dixie or whatever the supermarket is. Where do you see these things? Where do you see mushrooms? Where do you see sprouts? Where do you see tree nuts and peanuts? Those kind of things. Generally speaking, they're somewhere near that produce section. Generally speaking, these are going to be in scope. So that gets a whole lot of stuff. Now, in scope but exempt. And what that means is you're in the rule, you got to comply with the rule, but for some reason or another, there's an exemption that's been carved out. The first exemption is what we call the tester amendment, and I realize you're not going to see the word tester, generally speaking, in the law anywhere. That's Senator, I think, or Congressman John Tester out of Montana. And that has to do with the size of your operation, your market channels, and where those market channels are, where your customers are relative to your farm, okay? The issue there is size is measured in food sales. Food sales. And the reason I want to stress food is broader than fresh fruits and vegetables. If it's a regulated food, if it's a food that FDA regulates, that comes under this umbrella of food sales. And right now, it's less than $500,000 in food sales. That's the first qualifier. The second qualifier is your market channels. Who's buying that food? Are you selling it direct to a consumer? Are you selling it directly to a retail store? It doesn't go into a warehouse or a distribution center, but directly to a retail store. Or are you selling it directly to a restaurant? That's the second qualifier, the market channel piece. And then the third qualifier is specifically for those retail stores that you're selling to or the restaurants that you're selling to. It's a 275-mile from your farm mileage limitation. So if the majority of your food, if you're under $500,000 in sales, and then if the majority of your food are going to these market channels and the retailers and the restaurants are less than 275 miles away, then you qualify for that tester exemption.
About $500,000.
Excuse me?
About $500,000, is that only for the produce side of an operation, or what does that?
That's a good question. The question is that $500,000 threshold just for produce, or is it for all foods? It's for all food sales, so it's beyond produce. If it's regulated by FDA, which is almost everything except meat that USDA's Food Safety Inspection Service regulates, so if it's grain, if it's seafood, if it's... yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yep.
It's Leanne's LLC growing raspberries less than 500,000. Is it exempt? And is it if it's Beth's in the same farm, LLC growing cantaloupe, does that divide it out as a different farming operation?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. But what I would say is that you need to talk to your legal counsel and perhaps whoever does your finances to decide whether or not, my view is if you actually make a legal split and fall under the 500 and market channels and distance from a farm, potentially you would end up with that exemption. But just be sure that you've made the right decision from a business perspective, rather than trying to find a way out of the regulation. Not saying you can't do it, but I would very definitely check with your legal counsel on that. Alan?
Yeah, but the thing, I mean, I understand where the questions are coming from, but the bottom line is, this is revolving around the FDA requirements, which are probably going to kind of go hand in hand with audits and so forth. So if your buyer says, we don't care if you're less than 500,000, we still want food safety.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt.
Then you're still going to have to do it.
Yeah, God bless America that we live in a country where capitalism is king, for a lot of reasons. In this case, your buyer is going to dictate to you what they want done. So yeah, you're right. It doesn't matter how you might split it up. And you may have just created a huge headache for yourself if you have split it up. So you're just going to have to be careful about how you do that if that's the direction you're going to take. Beth, you have a question or comment?
I have a question, and you may get to this earlier or later, but if I fall into the attester amendment exemption, does that mean that I don't have to do anything? Or does that mean that I need to be doing it, but I may not be audited?
That's a good question. If I should happen to fall into the tester amendment, I get that exemption. Does that mean I don't have to do anything, or should I do something for an audit, for example? First of all, if you get this exemption, you still have to comply with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, regardless. So you've got FSMA, and you've got the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which is the big umbrella even over FSMA. So you still have to comply with that no matter what. You can't put adulterated food into commerce, okay? And you still have to comply with things like OSHA and EPA regulations, all that kind of stuff. That doesn't take away your responsibility there. The other thing is, if you are FSMA exempt, because a tester, written into the law says that you've got to now potentially label your product. It's very clear. It's a couple of little conditions you've got to meet. So you could be exempt from tester for doing what we're talking about here and the requirements, but you've still got to label your products depending on what they might be. But back to Beth's question about, do I still have to do these things for an audit? That's where the marketplace dictates to you as the supplier what that customer wants you to do. So if your customer tells you, you know, great, you're exempt, that's wonderful, but I still need you to comply with it, you want to be making sure that you can do that in order to be able to continue to sell to that particular customer. Thanks, Beth. That's a good question. I know this is a little bit complicated. It's complicated for us having to write the rule around it and figure it out, but we'll get there. The next piece of in scope but exempt is a category that we're calling normally consumed cooked. You could flip that and say rarely consumed raw. So if you grow something that is normally consumed cooked, whether that means it's sent to a processing facility or you cook it at home, your customers cook it at home, they can't eat it without cooking it, like an artichoke, for example, we don't see any public health benefit to regulating that group of commodities that are going to be cooked no matter what, because the cooking process, in theory, will mitigate any risk that you've got. Now again, your customer could say, I don't care, I still want you to follow the regulation. But we looked at potatoes, sweet potatoes, artichokes as an example, there's other things, and said most people aren't going to eat those things raw anyway. And we didn't just pick these commodities out of the air. There's actually a consumer database that is that we use. FDA doesn't generate the database, somebody else does it. And it's 0.1% of eating occasions or fewer eat these things raw. So 99.9% of eating occasions and 99.9% of the people they surveyed cook these things. That's the listing that we came up with. And that list will be very specific once you see this regulation. The last piece that we've got is out of scope, and that has to do more with if you grow a commodity like tomatoes, for example, and you grow them specifically to go to processing to end up as tomato paste, those tomatoes grown in the field are not covered by this regulation because they're going to where they're going to be processed and cooked, clearly retorted, et cetera, et cetera. So those kind of things are out of scope as well. And then agronomic crops, grains, soybeans, cottonseed, that kind of stuff is not in the regulation either. Got another bit of scope I want to talk about, and let me just give you a laundry list of the provisions that are in the regulation that we say something about. In some cases, we're general. In other cases, we're very specific. We talk about, first of all, we talk about the scope, so we tell you what's in and what's out. Then we talk about personnel qualifications and training requirements. We talk about that. Soil amendments, as you could expect, since that's something that the law actually called out. Growing and harvesting operations, buildings, equipment and tools, restrooms, hand washing facilities, those kind of things we talk about in the regulation. We talk about records and record keeping. We've got some requirements. We tried to be as light as we could regarding records and record keeping. But as I've heard a couple places earlier today, your best opportunity to demonstrate you're doing something is to have had a record that you did it. So when we really drilled down on these parts about what's really important, that there has to be a record versus, oh, it'd be nice, but not really all that necessary. We try to drill down and be very specific to limit the record-keeping burden as much as we could. Also, I'll speak to records. If you're keeping a record for another reason, like, for example, you're keeping records because you're organic certified, and those records meet this need, you don't need to keep 2 sets of records. We don't want that to happen. We talk about worker health and hygiene, agricultural water, irrigation water, crop protection spray water, post-harvest water, those kind of things. Domestic and wild animals, we talk about those issues, and wild animals is one of the other things that we are specifically called out in the law. Your post-harvest operations, for the vast majority of you that pack your own product and nobody else's product, you only pack your own, that post-harvest operation is covered under this big umbrella. Sprouting operations. We called out sprouts in particular just because of the challenges that are associated with sprouting operations. And then we talked very briefly about enforcement and compliance, and I'll talk about that in detail here in a split second. What the regulation does not cover is traceability. I've heard that earlier today. Traceability is important. It is important. Traceability is very important to FDA, and don't change what you're doing about traceability. The Bioterrorism Act tells you you've got to go one up and one down if you're anything but a farm. If your farms are exempt, but others have to go one up and one down in terms of traceability. Don't change that. But the grand picture of traceability goes much farther than produce. It goes to all food products. And so there's a group at FDA working on traceability as trying to wrestle that one around. Produce will be linked into that, but for right now, that's somebody else's issue to deal with, not the produce safety regulation. We think it's important. We want you to have traceability, but it's not covered in this rule. So when you read the regulation, the proposal, and you say, hey, where'd traceability go? It's not in there. Don't look for it. Don't make yourself crazy trying to find it. So Beth mentioned earlier that we kind of went around and tried to sort out from FDA's perspective how we could tackle the grand industry that's called the produce industry. And it's big. You guys are a handful. I've been in the produce industry through my government job for darn near 30 years. And what apple folks do, and what citrus folks do, and what potato folks do, and tomato folks, and lettuce folks, you're a produce industry, but boy, when it comes right down to it, I'm a tomato grower, or I'm a lettuce grower, and there's a lot of differences that kind of kick into that. Hey, don't, yeah, thank you. One of the things that we looked at, and one of the challenges that we've got in terms of trying to establish regulations for commodities, and some of you may have heard that there's high-risk commodities, there's low-risk commodities. We really believe, after doing a ton of brainstorming, seeing farm operations, talking with farmers, that you could take any commodity, regardless of what it is, and you could make it less risky if it's considered higher risk, or you can make it more risky if it's considered low risk based on what you're doing. Your irrigation practices, your soil amendments that you use, whether or not you've got, you're next to a wildlife preserve, something like that. So we looked at trying to identify just commodities And at the end of the day, and when I say at the end of the day, I mean at the end of about 7 months of work, we concluded that we couldn't establish this group is high risk, this group is low risk in terms of listing commodities. We looked at outbreak data, we looked at contamination data, and it just was, where do you draw the line? Do you go back to outbreaks that only made people sick? Do you go back to outbreaks from 5 years ago? Well, why not 6 years ago? Well, why not 10 years ago? Do you look at the severity of illnesses? Tummy aches versus HUS versus death. Is there a line you should draw there? The bottom line is we opted, when we analyzed this whole challenge, we said we really wanted to focus on the practices rather than a specific commodity list. So that's the direction we've taken this thing for right now. Now, it could change tomorrow. I don't expect it to, but it could change tomorrow. So really what we amounted to is looking at risk-based approach. The Tester Amendment, whether you like it or you don't like it, the Tester Amendment applied some level of risk determination and pulled out those farms that qualify for Tester. Then the way we looked at it is, well, what practices do you do out there? And I don't know if Beth said it or maybe Annette said it with water. Overhead irrigation from a pristine water source, great. But overhead irrigation from a risky water source that has cattle up the hill, that's a challenge and that's a problem. So we looked at it from that perspective to talk about the risk. Now let me shift over, and I know I'm probably not satisfying you a whole lot on commodities versus practices. Let me shift over to research. We know that we need more research. And I would imagine University of Tennessee is probably going to do some research that across the country, different organizations, whether they're universities or trade organizations or whatever, are going to do some research. We feel like there's two areas specifically that are critical that will help strengthen the produce reg in general and will help different commodity groups and different regional growing areas sort of pull themselves away from some of the requirements. And that's okay, we're all fine with that. The two areas are raw manure use as a soil amendment and water quality when that water is directly applied to the edible portion of the crop. So generally speaking, we wouldn't consider drip tape irrigation touching any edible portion of the crop, generally speaking. So we don't consider that to be a research need necessarily. But if you're doing overhead irrigation, we want that water quality. We want to explore that a little bit more. And these are the two areas that we feel like there's a need for more research. And then we want to get that information, get it disseminated to the farmers across the country and even internationally. We've engaged a bunch of folks in that research. USDA is one of these groups. Western Center for Food Safety is another. CPS is a third. Other land grants. We want to look at them to pull some of this research together. And in order so that the research itself gives us results that we can compare apples to apples, or raw manure use to raw manure use, we are working to develop, and a group of researchers are working to develop research protocols. So once these research protocols are established, we'll say if you're going to do raw manure time research in Tennessee or in the Pacific Northwest or in desert of Arizona, use this protocol. And then the results you get will be credible enough for us to utilize as we further refine the regulation. So we're looking for that. We fully recognize that these two areas are critical and they're complex. We're not fooling ourselves about that. Education and outreach. This is sort of near and dear to my heart. The Produce Safety Alliance is sort of the big ticket item here. And Annette is on the Produce Safety Alliance, so use her. I'd say abuse her, but you may not want to go that far. But use her regarding her work on the Produce Safety Alliance. And you as farmers, we'd love to have you on the Produce Safety Alliance. Go to this website, sign up. There's 10 different working committees on 10 different topic areas. And we need your expertise, so we would love to have you on this thing. The target audience are farmers and regulators. Regardless of how you define regulator, that's part of our target audience to get training to, get educational materials to. And then we plan to have a train-the-trainer type of setup so that folks can train a few, and then you can go out and train a few more, and then you can go out and train a few more. So we're trying to look at it from that perspective. The goals, just what we've got up here, provide education and outreach materials to improve the understanding of gaps and co-management with the environment. We've got the USDA's NRCS folks involved with us on this as well. We think that's critical. The point is we want to develop standardized curriculum, and again, we need your farm perspective to help us develop that. And then we want to provide access to these materials. Initially, because we don't have a regulation in place, we're going to focus on that 1998 GAPS guide that I put up here earlier. That's our focus initially, and then updates to that since then. But then once the regulation kicks in, we're going to change the focus so the materials will reflect the produce safety regulation. So that's the direction we're taking that one with. Inspection or implementation and compliance. There's 185,000 farms in the United States that grow produce. If FDA started hiring today, they could never hire enough inspectors to inspect 185,000 farms. So instead of doing the old way of sort of the traditional way of doing things, they've gone about and looked at it from a non-traditional strategy. The primary part of that strategy is the education and outreach. So the first part that I just talked about, that's the key. We want to touch you and all your fellow farmers with education and outreach first, and we feel like that's going to get us a long way towards compliance. Then we want to use existing partnerships with USDA, for example, my program back at USDA, or other folks at USDA, folks at other government agencies. The state departments of agriculture, we want to use those folks as well. We want to consider how existing information can be used. So let me just see a quick show of hands. How many of you have been audited in some fashion? I know there's folks in here that have been audited by somebody. Okay. We want to figure out how to use that information to help build that into the compliance piece so that we don't necessarily have to go to your farm to inspect it. We can just look at that information, have confidence in what that information tells us, and use that to help demonstrate compliance. So if you're getting audited now, I would say continue down that road, and then we can find a way to use that information as time goes on in this compliance strategy. I won't bore you with that. Timeframes for implementation on the rule, because I think that's probably important to you, is once it's final. So we're still looking at a year from now. Okay, so don't anybody come out of their chairs. We're still looking at a year from now for compliance. But FDA has got to define very small farm, and they've got to define small farm. And the reason they've got to define it is because FDA normally does a staggered implementation strategy. So let's say you're not very small and you're not small. You fall into this all other category. If this thing goes final a year from now, you have another year to comply. If you're small, you've got 2 more years to comply, and if you're very small, you've got 3 more years to comply. That's the staggered implementation schedule that FDA normally uses. In addition to that, because we know water and the issues around water are so complicated, we're going to give everybody 2 more years for the water piece, because we know it's more complicated, and we realize that there may be some farms that are going to have to make some infrastructure changes. We don't want that to happen, but it may end up happening. So the water piece is an additional 2 years after this thing goes into effect. So if you're a very small farm, you don't have to comply with water for 5 years after this thing goes into effect. And then we feel like throughout this whole time frame, the education is critical. I can't say that enough. So I'm going to wrap up and just say, you know, I know I'm standing between you and supper time. I recognize that. But I would be happy to answer whatever questions you might have if I can, and if I can't, I'll make something up.
You said earlier about the public hearings.
Yes, sir.
What determines throughout the country you have those?
The question is what determines, or who determines, or how we determine where these public meetings are going to be. It's not my decision, I can tell you that, and I'm glad it's not my decision. Food and Drug Administration's got a pretty robust public affairs group, communications group, and they've got some strategy for figuring out where these things are going to be. I know for certain there's going to be one in the east, one in the central, and one in the west. That's the detail that I know right now, and to the extent that we can, we're going to try to reach as many different folks as we can. I think it's going to be the first one whenever that one happens. That's the one that'll be webcast. So no matter where you are, you can get to it as long as you got a computer sitting up. Go ahead.
I farmer's market. So we just sell to one place that is, they just take like 10 boxes and they don't require us to have this. So, and we definitely sell less than 500,000. And we do sell a few direct restaurants, but it's like 90 miles away from our farm. So we would be qualifying for that, right?
It seems, based on what you just told me, it seems like you would probably be tester exempt, yes.
Okay, but that, what does that mean? Because what she asked you, and you answered, still got me over.
Okay, no problem. No problem. So there's a couple things going on. You go back, I don't know how many years, dozens and dozens and dozens of years. The Food and Drug Administration has an act called the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Everybody in this room, if you grow food, you've got to comply with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And you probably already are, you just might not know it. The regulations that I'm talking about fall under the Food Safety Modernization Act, and that's where a tester comes into play. So you would be exempt from the raw manure issues, the water quality issues, the personal hygiene, the training, et cetera. You'd be exempt from those if you met the tester exemption, with the exception that tester does say, well, you could be exempt from all these pieces of the regulation, but you still have to label. So they put in a labeling requirement is what they've done. I can get you the information on that. Natalie, if you could just grab her name, we can get you that. I can point you right to where that is in the regulation. And when this regulation comes out, we will explain that for you as well.
So would you clarify then that they don't, if they meet the tester amendment requirements, that they don't have to have a written food safety plan? Is that what it's saying?
Well, that's sort of what it's saying, but I didn't say you had to have a written food safety plan anyway. But if the regulation comes out and says you have to have a food safety plan, then tester exempt would be exempt from that. Beth, a follow-up question.
May I follow up with that? So if you are a tester exemption and you're a small farm and something happens and all of a sudden a food-borne illness is traced back to you, do you feel like it could be plausible that FDA, when they come to your farm for an investigation, will expect you to have been to have been keeping documentation and having policies in place?
Okay, so the question is,
That's not leading up.
no, that's okay. You're a small farm. You meet the tester exempt qualifications, but a foodborne illness outbreak is traced to your farm. Would FDA expect you to have a food safety plan? I believe that FDA would not expect that, but what I do believe FDA would have the authority to do would be to inspect your farm against just the normal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, number one. But number two, the law does allow that if you are tester exempt and a food outbreak, foodborne illness outbreak is traced to your farm, we can revoke that exemption. That's part of the law. So might it be in your best interest anyway to be complying? My personal view is yes. That's not FDA's official view. Hold on a minute.
Is there any provision in this law for disaster compensation? If you all come out and trace it to my farm and say your raspberries that somebody put on their Cheerios killed them, and then they find out it's the damn Cheerios, and yet the raspberry market's gone all to hell because everybody's not buying raspberries. Is there any compensation, as I eat tomatoes several years ago, that was a disaster?
That's a great question. Is there any, what was the word you used? Compensation.
Let's put it that way.
So if FDA screws up is what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. It is my understanding, I have not read I should say, I have read the entire thing. I am focused on produce safety regulation. But it is my understanding that, in fact, there is part of the FSMA law that addresses that in some fashion. I believe it's later in the law. I can look it up for you and send you right to that. You've got it? Yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah.
I can, this is just easier.
Yeah, come on over.
So the law basically says that if, under this law, under the FSMA, the commissioner of FDA has the ability to authorize a mandatory recall, which he's never had before, or she, whoever it is. If the commissioner, as I understand it, as the law states, if the commissioner issues a mandatory recall, but within 90 days, but they find that it is wrongfully ordered, then with 90 days from the wrongfully ordered recall, the Government Accounting Office is to report to Congress how to compensate those parties. Tomatoes.
So yes, thank you, Beth, I appreciate that. There was another question somewhere? Alan?
Well, we keep having this discussion, and my understanding is that if you are qualified, under an exemption by the Tester Amendment, and you are selling farmers markets, roadside stands, et cetera, that then you may be subject, if you aren't already, that you will be subject to inspection by a local health department?
Well, yeah, actually, that's a great question. If you are selling to farmers markets, are there other regulations that you've got to meet? And I don't know what all those regulations are. I'll be the first to tell you that. But I do know that your state Department of Ag or your state Department of Public Health, whichever one regulates the farmers market circuit, very likely has some regulations that you would have to meet anyway. They're not FSMA regulations, but there is something out there. The other thing, don't forget, you would have to meet the labeling requirements and, of course, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, just as a backstop to everything. But yeah, your local health department or ag department could have such regulations, and we've got an expert in the room that can address that. That's you. Come on. Come on.
Actually, for whole produce that's sold at farmers markets or anywhere else, we have no regulations. We do not regulate whole produce currently. Actually, it's actually exempted in our law. And the current state now, as stated, if from an adulteration standpoint, contamination standpoint, we would have the ability under the FTC Act to take action against that produce, but we currently do not regulate sale of whole produce.
So you've chosen, for whatever the reason is, you've chosen not to regulate it, but the backstop of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act could bring that into you, that authority into you. So that's Tennessee. If you sell to North Carolina or to Virginia or to wherever, each state's going to have their own little twist on things.
Well, I have several questions, but one is, how specifically do we make these comments? You keep saying, go to the site and comment. What are the details of doing that?
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to give you, this sounds crazy, we're going to give you guidance on how to comment, just in terms of the sense of the more detail you can give me. Regarding the water provisions, we use overhead irrigation on our farm and blah, 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 and we've had water tests and they show this and they show that. Any kind of detail like that that you can give us is all the better. Again, just...
That's not my question.
Okay. Well,
My question is, how do I get these comments to you?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's a horse of a different color. I apologize for misinterpreting that. Generally speaking, you will go to regulations.gov, regulations.gov, and you'll enter into the boxes that are there the number of the regulation, and you'll know that because we will have blanketed the country with what that is, and it'll pop up a place for you to start typing in your comments. If you want to type it out in a Word document on your computer, or if you want to handwrite it and submit it, that's okay too. There will be an address to mail them to if you want to do it that way, or you can attach a document to the regulations.gov website, and that will take your comment in.
So we have to know the number of this.
Right,
We
and
will know because you've blanketed the country.
yes, exactly. Yeah, you can. Your trade org will know it. Yeah, Beth will have it off the top of her head. Yeah, everyone will have it. That's your first question.
All right, my second one is, I feel there's a discrepancy in what's in not compliance, what do you call it, starts with S. If you are in scope, but exempt, you said that if it's something that's regulated, like corn or grain, that would be included in the tester. You would have to include that money in your $500,000 for the tester amendment. And yet later on, it said that you're out of scope if you're raising those products, the corn, the grain, all that. So if we raise, as CSA producers, we raise things that would make us into the tester amendment. But we also raise row crops, so is that going to throw us out of it?
Well, let me start by saying I didn't write the tester language. That was Congress. They, in their infinite wisdom, they came up with what the parameters were, and they were very clear that it was this $500,000 threshold for all foods, not just produce.
So it's included as foods for tester, but it's not included as being in scope?
That's correct. That's correct.
All right. My other question is, and I don't mean to be insulting about this.
Go for it.
But when we had the man from Washington on the phone, last year was it? He couldn't get here because of the snow?
Right.
He said that there had been 15 people who had died since 1995 because of food-borne problems.
Okay.
Those are the government's figures. There have been more people killed getting in their car to come to these meetings than that. To put us through all of this and make it sound like we didn't have a clue about food safety until the government brought up these rules and put billions of dollars into creating all of these rules that are going to make everybody safe. I find that very insulting.
I appreciate your comment. Did y'all fairly well hear that? Let me address it this way if I can. I grew up in a farming family. I've been in agriculture, fruit and vegetable industry my entire life. I absolutely believe that farmers are the best stewards of the land. You've been providing a safe, wholesome, fresh meal for decades, hundreds of years. I agree with you there, absolutely. And there have been foodborne outbreaks linked to fresh produce. Whether the number is one body or 1,000 bodies, there has been. And between the leadership and Congress decided that this needs to be regulated. We fully believe that you guys, you farmers, are going to be the best people to know what really is necessary, and that's why we've done so much outreach. We're going to do more, but we've done a lot of outreach to learn from you. I am certainly not going to stand here and say, well, I know it all. I don't know it all. You've been farming for all these years. You know what works in your operation. You know what your water source is. You've already had to do a lot of things for whatever the reason is. Obviously, you want to provide a fresh and wholesome and safe food product for anybody to eat. You don't want to be implicated in a foodborne illness outbreak. Absolutely not. But the law tells us what we've got to do. I certainly don't want to stand here and sound like this is a farmer's fault, because
I'm
that's.
not insulted by you. I'm insulted by the law.
But
you know, you could pretty much save a few $1 billion by saying, wash your hands, wash your food.
that would be a good start. That would be a real good start.
I just want that comment on the record.
I appreciate that, and put that comment in your comments when you officially send them. I mean, seriously, that's not a bad thing to say at all. Any more questions for right now?
This kind of touches on what she just said. You know, rules and regulations, we gotta have. The part I kind of have trouble with is because somebody grows 100 boxes of tomatoes, they don't have to do the same thing I do because I grow more than that. I mean, if you grow it, you grow it. A person can get sick off of a box of tomatoes as easy as they can get sick off of 100 boxes.
Mm-hmm.
So why is anybody exempt from it?
I believe anybody can grow a good product, and anybody can screw up growing a product. It's just a matter of what you're doing. It shouldn't matter if you sell to one person and sell 100 boxes or you sell 100,000 boxes. There's risk in everything that you do. Congress wrote the law, and in their infinite wisdom decided that that was the right thing to put in. I can't speak to it other than we've got to follow, in terms of our job at FDA, to write a regulation that gets to that. I would, yes, you do.
Yes.
Alan?
Ms. Burley,
got all night. My flight's tomorrow morning.
Your amendment is in there, but in the final regulation that you all, publish, is there any way that it can be taken? I don't want to hurt the small farmer, because I understand Steve's side, and we have this conversation all the time. A 10-acre grower should be in the same basic. If I'm wholesaling fruits and vegetables, a 1-acre grower ought to be held accountable. A 10-acre grower is a 100-acre grower, etc. But I think the biggest concern that a lot of small growers have is, it's very, very expensive for somebody out here growing a half-acre of tomatoes to go through a third-party gap audit and all that expense, and I understand that. But is there some way, I guess, in all this, as you do the procedure, that those inequities can be addressed?
The simple answer to that is no, because the law is the law, and Congress opted to write it the way they did, and we're beholden to write a regulation that addresses the law and doesn't go beyond what the law allows us to do. But I strongly believe, as you all have customers, that the marketplace is going to demand, from whether you grow half acre or whether you grow 1,000 acres. The marketplace is going to be what it is, and your customers are going to say, I know you're exempt, but not if you want to stay my customer. I think that's going to happen. So I think there'll be a course correction that is outside the realm of what the regulatory community can do. Any other questions? I know you'll have more. I appreciate that you'll have more. Natalie knows how to reach me. Beth knows how to reach me. James will know how to reach me. And we welcome your comments when the regulation comes out as a proposal. We want you to read it. We want you to give us your comments on it. I appreciate that you invited me here to speak today. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Leanne. Couple of housekeeping items. First, Alan, Tom Selleck, and I can't remember that series, like a movie series. He was a police chief where.